Now, Clive Derby-Lewis's interview before his death has emerged. In it, he exonerates former President Thabo Mbeki from having a hand in Chris Hani's death, but says the decision to assassinate the communist leader was purely political. Owner of AfriForum Films, Ernst Roets, conducted the interview. He joins us now via Skype. So thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Having read some of the things that Clive Derby-Lewis said to you, one can't help but come to the conclusion that this man wholeheartedly supported apartheid.
Yes, well, I think he did. And his whole argument behind the killing of Chris Hani, which he explained in quite some detail in the interview, was a very interesting strategy. His argument was that, according to the polls at that time, especially white South Africans, who were the only ones who were allowed to vote, were becoming frustrated with the National Party. And they believed, or he especially believed, that the Conservative Party would have won the next election. So he thought that the killing of Chris Hani would put the country in a situation where the country would have been ungovernable, to use the ANC's terms, which would then lead to a national election where the ANC would still be excluded. And then the argument was that during that election, the Conservative Party would have won. So his argument during the interview, and I asked him at one stage, but didn't you believe that apartheid was dead in any case? And he seemed to believe that we could have continued with apartheid. I don't know if he wanted to continue with it exactly in the same way, but yes, he did support the idea.
So why then does he say that Chris Hani had to be murdered because he was an uncontrollable radical who was targeting civilians, yet he went out of his way to try to meet with Chris Hani's family to, try to get some closure?
Yes, that's sort of the inconsistency that people point out in the interview. On the one hand, I asked him that question, why Chris Hani, and also why did you not decide to go for Nelson Mandela, for example, or Thabo Mbeki? And he said, no, it's because Chris Hani was such a radical that he had much more support of the youth, and that he was the leader of Mkhonto we Sizwe, and obviously also the leader of the SACP. So that was his line of reasoning behind why Chris Hani should have been killed. But his argument was, I think he felt to the very end of his life that he was misunderstood. He felt that it was not a crime in the normal sense of the word. He saw it as an act of war. And his frustration was with the fact that the legal system did not agree with him. His argument was South Africa was in a state of war, and in wartime anything goes, as he put it during the interview. But of course, the Court of Law did not agree with him. The Truth and Reconciliation's Amnesty Committee did not agree with him, and he had a very difficult time getting medical parole in the last few years of his life.
Now, having read all the things he has said and you having interviewed him, when you were sitting there, did you in your mind say this man was a racist?
Well, what happened, the context behind the interview, I met with him actually while he was still in hospital. Because we believe that there were double standards in terms of his medical parole. Comparing his case with that of Shabir Sheikh and Jackie Selebe. And we had a discussion, and I think that what stood out for me the most was that he was in prison for 22 years, so he was still living or his mind was still fixed in the pre-1994 era. That's where all his memories come from. So that's what the interview what made it so interesting for me was he still spoke like someone living in 1993, because that's when he went to prison. That was his frame of thought. His argument, when he was in prison, he gave classes to some of his fellow inmates, especially the black inmates. So he had a lot of projects, and he was involved with a lot of initiatives in prison to uplift the people there. So in that sense, you would say no. But looking at the way he interprets, or he still believed that apartheid could have continued, I think, as I said, he was still fixed in that 1993 frame of mind.
So was he sorry at all, though?
I asked him that towards the end of the interview, and he didn't say that he regrets what he has done, and he didn't say that he did not regret it. I think what he said, obviously at the time, he didn't think that he would go to prison. But he didn't come across, because I compared him to Eugene ter Blanche. When Eugene ter Blanche came out of prison, he said at one stage that he was a changed man. And I asked him that, does he believe that he's changed after his trial and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 22 years he spent in prison? And then he said, I don't think so, no. He said that he's still the same man. He still has the exact same views that he had before Chris Hani was killed. He said at that time he didn't think that he would have been caught. Yeah, as I said, it's interesting to speak with a man like that. And we didn't know that he would pass away so soon after the interview was conducted. But it really gave, for me, almost the most interesting part, or one of the most interesting parts of the interview was precisely for this reason, was the first part where he spoke about the politics of the 1990s, the early 1990s, the politics between the Conservative Party and the National Party and the Afrikaner politics, because that's his frame of reference, and it was quite interesting to watch.
Now, given that we have some concerns around race issues in South Africa right now, as a white South African having sat down in this interview to speak to Clive Derby-Lewis, how do you feel hearing things like that being said post-democracy, or post-apartheid rather?
Yeah. Well, I think what my comment was after we published the interviews, I thought that he was, look, it's very well known that Clive Derby-Lewis was a perpetrator. He committed murder and he went to prison for that. But in a certain sense, he was also a victim. I do think, and he spoke about it at length during the TRC hearings, if you compare, for example, the process that Clive Derby-Lewis went through as opposed to some of the ANC members and the crimes that they were involved with, it appears that there were political double standards. But look, the fact that I did the interview with him doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he said. And when I spoke with him before the interview, I said to him that two things. This interview is not going to be an interview of me nodding all the time and agreeing with him. But also, I'm not going to try to put him on trial during the interview because he went through that process already. So for me, the purpose, I think my role in that interview was not to support him or to disagree with him during the interview, but simply to ask some of the more difficult questions, or the questions that people wanted to hear the answers, such as why did you kill Chris Hani? Was Thabo Mbeki involved in any way? Do you believe the assassination attempt on your life was politically motivated, and so forth?
Were you shocked with his responses? And you say that you couldn't agree with everything, but could you actually agree with anything this man said?
Yes, well, the interview was more than an hour long. I do agree, my personal view, I do agree with him in terms of the inconsistencies within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As I said, if you compare, for example, his case to some of the very, very horrific atrocities that were committed by people who supported the ANC, and how they got off very lightly, how they were granted amnesty very, very easily. And also, if you compare his case for medical parole with that of Shabir Sheikh and Jackie Selebi, I agree with him that there were inconsistencies, that there seems to be political double standards. But in terms of what happened before 1994, or before 1993 rather, when Chris Hani was killed, there's a lot of things that he said that I disagree with. One of the questions I asked him was, what does he believe were the biggest mistakes of the Conservative Party? And he spoke about some of them, but I think the Conservative Party made more mistakes than those that he pointed out.
All right, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. That was the AfriForum Films, Ernst Roets.